Who is going to carry out the transformations that would make permanent revolution a reality in countries like Egypt and Tunisia?
Of women, class and capitalism, because I think Judith and Laurie are going to talk about more specific areas. Okay, so we know that these cuts are hitting women the hardest. It was predicted and it's happening in terms of job losses, public sector cuts, benefit cuts, and so on. 65% of public sector workers are women, and for this reason and some others, women are losing their jobs now at a faster rate than men. Which wasn't happening at the sort of beginning of the economic crisis, where men were for a while losing their jobs faster than women. Over the past year, female unemployment has gone up by 64,000, while male unemployment has gone down by 69,000. Right, so it's going like this. Of those women still working in the public sector, those of us still lucky to have a job, up to 70 to 80% of their jobs are currently at risk. And as we know, women are often concentrating lower grade, insecure and part-time work, which is often the first to take a hit. And there's a kind of more sinister point here, which is when men were losing their jobs in the private sector, and that's the sector that's sort of most likely to recover, if indeed the economy does ever recover. Whereas, given the predominance of women in public sector jobs, these are jobs that are going to be cut forever if the Tories have their way. So there's a kind of, really, really dark story going on here about the total eradication of jobs. And I'm going to talk about at the end about why I think, or the way in which this is being ideologically positioned in terms of what we mean when we talk about work. So in a way, what we're seeing is a return to the last hired first fired model of female unemployment, which feminism has criticised for a long time, and a whole wave of regressive and ideological attacks on women as workers. But I want to stress there is another side to this story, and that's that the role of women, young and old, in the fight back, whether it be over student fees and education cuts, on the 26th of March and the public sector protests on June the 30th recently. So it's not simply doom and gloom. The fact that people, women in particular, are protesting against these cuts has really become apparent. And I think in the sort of few years since I wrote that, cobbled together that pamphlet, I think lots has changed, really. Not just the Tories coming in and being sort of more brutal than I think most people could have even imagined, really, in terms of the speed of their cuts. But also positively, in terms of interest in feminism and interest in standing up and being counted. I think a lot has changed, and I feel both more worried and yet more positive at the same time, I suppose. Just a sort of side note, I mean, it's revealing and often hilarious to look at the right-wing media's representation of female protesters, particularly over the last 6 months, whether it be the Daily Mail's infamous Rage of the Girl Rioters cover, in which they sort of took photos of women sort of trashing the police van, which was obviously left there as a plant anyway, but or the more recent, this is like from 3 days ago, the recent attack in The Sun, which I encourage you to look at, I can't believe I'm saying this, entitled, and this is as part of their Stop the Summer of Hate campaign, by the way, entitled, this article is entitled The Scar Girls, after Scar Lefties Lead Strike, which featured the NUT's Christine Blower with a giant red painted scar girl appearing ghost-like behind her. And the sentence, 2 hate-filled women leading the teachers' strike today were are left-wing extremists who put their twisted politics ahead of their kids' education. So I think it is easy, whilst it is easy to laugh at these representations, I think they're best seen as part of a long history of attacks on women as political and economic agents. So thinking back to anti-suffragette propaganda, of which there was massive since the beginning of the century, all the way up to the way in which Ladettes became this sort of figure of hate in the 90s. And now these kind of attacks on militant women, whether they be students or trade union leaders and members. I think this sort of significance of this right-wing backlash becomes more kind of apparent and contextualised. All this comes, of course, as women join unions in increasing numbers, even if union membership is not particularly high at the moment, and even if there's still a kind of macho culture and sort of men often in positions of power, nevertheless there is this kind of rising up through unions, which makes a lot of sense, particularly given the things that are under attack primarily. So really, I mean, one of the things I want to raise as a kind of question or a problem really is the way in which work, and particularly work where women predominate, is valued. And it seems to me, and I haven't quite clarified this, but we're sort of in a period of neo-Dickensianism or neo-Victorianism, in which types of work, care work in particular, so work that's particularly associated with women, whether it be in employment or in the home, are becoming redescribed as relating to the voluntary sector, right? As if this is somehow a kind of moral duty, whether it be a kind of, you know, in the domestic sphere or in the sphere of work. And I think it's no coincidence the kind of cuts we're seeing, and you know, the attacks on the NHS in particular, nursing, care work, and so on. There's a kind of paradox going on here, which is both a kind of admission that this work is the most valuable work, in a way, and work you can't kind of outsource and so on, but also an attempt to sort of move it out of a kind of sphere of employment and relate it to something like, yeah, precisely, volunteer work, right? This is a kind of crap Tory big society idea that we should all be volunteering to do these things. And it reminds me of my friend Becky, who's a nurse, and she gets quite cross when people who are sort of well-meaning, in a well-meaning way, sort of say, oh, isn't it lovely that you're a nurse, you know, well done, you're such a wonderful person, you're such a good person. And she is, right? But at the same time, her response is always quite reasonably, you know, does this mean you think I shouldn't get paid for it then, right? Or, you know, why am I being paid so badly, right? What is this, you know, this sense in which people who are doing good things, doing things for the public, doing things for other people, why is that work devalued? It's obviously, as many people have pointed out, it's completely topsy-turvy. You know, why do we pay these sort of, you know, arrogant bankers all this money? You know, they're not generating anything useful. And I think there's a kind of serious, sort of difficult question here about the way in which certain types of work and certain kinds of behaviour have been so devalued that we don't, you know, we tend not to give enough credit to care work, you know, looking after kids, you know, looking after other people, looking after the sick and so on. And a lot of it is to do with the general kind of devaluing of women as such. And I think we've got to turn it around and say, look, without this work, nothing else gets done. You know, and this is the work that should be paid. This is not, people are not just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. You know, obviously people are good, right? And one of the paradoxical, again, well, no, it's not, this isn't even paradoxical, this is just evil, right? One of the things that, sorry, I shouldn't really use evil, it's not a very good physical category. But when the coalition government sort of points to the way in which they're trying to get people to, you know, do this voluntary work and, you know, take away these kind of jobs from the public sector and somehow turn them into this, you know, moral duty or something, in a way they're playing off of a real desire, which is the desire that already exists and already is in practice for people to want to help other people around them, to work in communities, to work with each other, to take care of each other's children and so on. And what they're doing is they're spinning that in this horrific way and saying, you know, that therefore, because, you know, people have this natural desire and do these things, that they should somehow be removed from any form of remuneration. And we've got this a very difficult battle to win about this definition of work. And we know that the definition of work is changing in general, but you know, I think if you see it through this lens of gender, through this sort of devaluing of work that's typically associated with women, you know, both ideologically and materially in terms of the cuts, then we've got something there to go on, to start and to fight back against these bastards.
Mentioned. This will be on sale afterwards. Okay, the next speaker is going to be Judith Orr, who is author of Socialist Worker at the moment, and she's also editor of Socialist Worker and author of Sexism and the System. Again, I've got along here. She'll speak for about 10 to 12 minutes.
There's been a real renaissance in interest in ideas about women's liberation and women's oppression, hasn't there, in recent years? And I think even the fact the platform today reflects that. I think even to have Laurie and Nina, who have been writing about, have been active in, and are coming here to debate and discuss these things, is a reflection of that renaissance in the debate of ideas. And I think that's a brilliant thing, and it's something, to be honest, that many of us have been wanting for a long time, to be more debate and argument and discussion, and to be more activism around the question of women's oppression, and about how the anger that we feel when we witness or experience discrimination and oppression. And I know there's always an argument from some elements of the media and everywhere else that, you know, women's oppression is no longer a problem, you know, we've got it all. Well, you only need to look at, just to rubbish that just in my first couple of minutes, to look at the case of Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Because head of the IMF, one of the most powerful men in the world, being accused of rape by, we would normally call them chambermaids here, but they want to be called room attendants. That's how they call themselves in the States. And look what they're doing to that woman. Look what they're doing to her. What they do to people, women who've suffered rape all over. But because this is so high profile, we're seeing it played out in front of the global press, because they want him to be the next president of France, for God's sake. So, you know, this is a situation that I think we need to be aware of what that represents, if you like, what that reflects, what they're trying to do to her character. And I think really the fact that he is such a disreputable character that wants to smash the living standards of loads of Greek workers actually should make him an unreliable witness, and he shouldn't be allowed to give witness in court. But I think it says everything about class and about power, that case. But of course there's a number of other things, and I think Laurie's going to talk about some of them in terms of what the Tories are doing, whether it's Kenneth Clarke saying some rapes aren't too bad, you know, and whether it's Nadine Dorries, because this isn't just about men. Nadine Dorries is piling in there happily to attack abortion rights. And also the whole impact that I've talked about for many years at Marxism and others about raunch culture for a long time, but it still permeates every part of our popular culture. And there's been a whole number of political responses to that. I mean, in the case of the hotel workers in New York, I thought it was bloody fantastic that they came and had a union demonstration where they were bussed from all over New York so they could hear him in the court when Strauss-Kahn was in there. Mostly women and some men, many of them from all over the world who've come to America just to try and make a living. And of course you've got to lie to get immigration status, aren't you? To try to get a future for yourself. Of course you bloody are. But that sense of actually responding in a collective way I thought was fantastic. But of course there's been other things. I mean, in response to the Canadian cop saying that you shouldn't dress like a slut if you don't want to get raped, we've had the slut walks, an enormous phenomenon which has gone everywhere, and I was on the one here, it was huge and big and brilliant, it felt like an anti-cap student demo. I'm actually against the idea of embracing and saying slut is something we should be celebrating everything else. I don't think that's a way forward for us at all, but I want to engage, and I think it's fantastic that people want to go and march against women getting blamed for rape. This is something that, you know, we haven't seen in such a brilliant way for some time. We've had the Reclaim the Night marches, but I think there's some political differences and problems with some of those, but they've been huge as well. But this was something different, qualitatively different, I think. We also see at the top of society, even the extent that women are excluded from the capitalist class is worrying some of them, because they think, oh, we're missing out on some talent for squeezing profit out of people if we exclude women. So today we see there's going to be this new 30% club, not 50%. We're not quite ready to have 50% of people on the FTSE Top 100 boards, but there's going to now be an attempt to go for 30%. And all the time new campaigns. And it's led to a resurgence in the ideas of feminism, or, you know, women calling themselves feminists. And I've hated the fact that for so many years some people have said, oh, I don't want to call myself a feminist, but I'm for women's rights, because it's almost like feminist is a dirty word, it's something that's very prescriptive, something that's very prudish and narrow-minded and all the rest of it. And some of the new feminists even say this, like, don't worry, I don't wear dungarees, and this sort of thing. And I think that's something that's, you know, I'm glad that that isn't seen in such a way. But I also think as a socialist, you know, that I've got, you know, the socialists have something slightly different to say. And what's interesting is you do hear people talking about patriarchy now. No, I think that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, can't it? It could just be a description of a society which is dominated by men, which it is. You know, the ruling class is male-dominated, no doubt about it. But it can be something that's more theoretical. I think it's worth trying to tease out what we say about oppression and what we say about class and what we say about exploitation. Because I don't think we can talk about oppression and class as just, sometimes people say there's racism, there's classism, there's sexism, as if these are all just different sort of discriminations. And I think, for me, we have to understand how oppression is rooted in class society. It flows from class society, not from capitalism. Capitalism is much more recent. Class society goes back much further, and there's been meetings on it. You can get the CD. I won't have time to go through it. But I think that we want to look at that and actually understand that oppression does cut across class. It is different than class exploitation. Those women in the boardroom are being discriminated against. They get sexually harassed. They earn less than their male counterparts. Oppression does cut across class. But actually, how does it actually work? Because actually, I don't think you can truly understand the impact of oppression unless you look at it in the framework of class and understand how that when you are exploited and oppressed, how that has an impact on you, but how it also then gives you the key to fight back. And, you know, in terms of the roots, I mean, we have to always say that women's oppression has not been a permanent feature of human society. Far from it. It's actually quite a recent developing with the rises of hierarchies and classes. And therefore, the whole sense of how women ended up becoming marginalised from productive work because of their reproductive role is something that actually shaped where women are in society today. Even though today, actually there's no need for women not to do certain jobs because they give birth. You know, we can do everything. New technology has been an important part of this. Actually, new technology meant it was, part of women coming into the workforce and the post-war boom and everything. But that sense that actually our reproductive, our biology doesn't need to be a prison for us, that we can't take part in society, is something that I think we have to be very clear about. And also, you know, people talk about longer hours and how do you look after your kids, and you don't necessarily want to put your kids in a nursery for 12 or 14 hours a day and all the rest of it. We don't need to work the hours that we work. Because there's people who are unemployed who won't work. There are people who are working long hours and overtime just to make it. We know that we can provide plenty for everybody on the globe, plenty of food, housing, everything that we need. And all of us would just have to work a few hours a day. Now, wouldn't that be a world? Wouldn't that be a world where actually bringing up children could be much easier? That the parents and collectively society could carry that responsibility in a much more enjoyable way. Why doesn't it happen? Well, women's oppression is very useful for modern capitalism. It has been useful through our class society. Because to actually maintain the idea that our reproductive role in the family is our key sphere, is the thing that we were really built for. You know, everybody talks about, you know, the childbearing hips, then that goes to being your whole mentality must be the caring, sharing, kind, nice person that always worries about everybody else. And also that plays into the sort of equal but opposite role of us being some sort of, you know, sexual goddess, you know, that we've got to look beautiful all the time, whether we're 11 years old or whether we're 111, you know, this idea that we've got to be a sex object is something that goes along with this. But I think this whole idea of the childbearing side of it being most important goes to why the institution of the family is so important, even today. They're pushing that institution. We see it with the Tories, don't we? It isn't just, they say, oh, families are important because they're the cohesive glue for society, because they think that this is a way of disciplining us into all having a sense of individual responsibility for all the ills. If young people are unemployed, or young people are hanging around the streets, or kids truant from school, or all these things, blame the parents. They could have been bringing them up right. Don't blame society for not giving them anything useful to do, or for treating young boys like they're criminals just because maybe they wear a hood. You know, these are the sort of things that actually make young people rebel and feel alienated and disenfranchised. But oh no, it's all about the parents. But the ideology works because also it's this economic role the family plays. And increasingly, in the world that Nina describes with the cuts, we're going to be facing a lot more the idea that really who's going to look after the people with disabilities, who's going to look after the old that are being kicked out of the old people's homes that are going bust because they were doing all the investment and all the rest of it. The whole idea of the family, and it's out of our basic humanity. People will do this, will look after the elderly, will look after when the childcare is cut back, but it'll be the family who will be carrying that burden. Who's the family? Women. Not just all women, because actually ruling class and rich and women can actually pay other women to do these jobs for them. It'll be working class women carrying that burden. So therefore, for me, you know, when they go on about the family, I know what they're doing. It's a tool to try to keep us in control, to keep us in our place as women and as a class. Because they want, you know, at one time Ford's, the car factory said we want married men because they won't strike, because they've got a family to bring up, you know, and that will be a conservative element on it. Now, we know these things aren't directly true, and some people feel they've got no choice but to strike because otherwise we won't survive. We saw that on the 30th. But, you know, this is the mentality. But for them, the family is not a principle, because at the same time as they're saying we have to uphold the family, single parents, the majority of whom are women, are being told now that they're being told they have to go to work if their oldest child is 7. By the end of this year, they're going to be told they have to go to work when their eldest child is 5. And that is going to make a difference of 185,000 women are going to move from getting benefit to being on job seekers allowance, which is much less, and which means that they'll be, you know, treated in a completely different way. That's how much they care about the family, trying to shove women out to jobs that there isn't, on a lower benefit. And so, just to wrap up, as a stereotype, women are going to be in the front line, both in terms of because many women do work in the public sector, but obviously not exclusively, and also because many of the services that are provided are ones that working class women take advantage of. Does that mean the world is in a terrible place and that there's nothing we can do and that we're just victims of this, victims of oppression, victims of exploitation? Of course not, because the key to fighting back is our collective strength, where we are organised together. We can experience oppression often as an individual, whether it's through sexism, whether it's through low pay and everything else, but actually our way to fight it is by being in the collective. And half of the workforce are women. We're a permanent part of that workforce. We're part of the workforce. That's it. We're not changing. We're not going back in the box. And that's what gives us our strength to carry forward and fight. And in those struggles, the ideas that flow from a rotten competitive capitalist society can be changed into ideas which flow from collective struggle and people feeling strong and not thinking they can blame each other, but blaming the real enemies, who are those people at the top.
We've got Laurie, who, author of Meat Market, which again we've got at the front, is a journalist, writer and an activist, so please.
I wanted to start off by saying thanks to Marxism for inviting me to speak, and also it's really, really great to be speaking on the platform with two of the only feminist authors, I think, who are actually talking sense about the nature of women's oppression at the moment. Because seriously, I think this is a problem, because it's very. I mean, we all and Nina and Judith have said that there is a resurgence in feminist ideas, and I think that's really, really great. But on the other hand, I mean, I guess I want to come in at the end and be a bit of a downer, and say. Not all feminist ideas are equal, and there are some quite damaging bourgeois feminist ideas out there at the moment, which I think we have to be deeply suspicious of, and we have to critique along the way as we formulate a new idea, a new response to patriarchy, a new response to sex class and sex class oppression. And to illustrate how this kind of feminist critique can go wrong, I wanted to share a little moment from the Reclaim the Night March, which I went on a couple of years ago. And the Reclaim the Night March is a march against sexual violence against women, and which is organised by the London Feminist Network, which is a bourgeois feminist group who kicked me out, so I don't. I'm still on their mailing list. They don't know. I look at their little squabbles, and then I want to kill everything. But they also have some very, very funny and venal ideas about transsexual people, but we won't go there because that's a whole other talk. And so I was walking along behind these two women at the start of the march, who were studying the march route. And I thought, and it's really great. I mean, I don't want to say that people shouldn't go on these things, because they're really, really great. It's great to see people of all ages out there, But I was listening to their conversation, and I think it was a couple of sisters, and one of them was studying the march route and said, "God, that's about 5. That looks like it's almost 5 miles. It wasn't, but it's about a mile and a half." It's like, God, that's really long. And the other one said, "Yeah, but think how many calories will burn on this march." I was like, oh my God, you're going on a feminist march in order to lose weight. That's the worst thing I've ever had. And so, on that note of the notion of auto-critique, I wanted to raise two of the big important questions that feminists in the mainstream press seem to be terribly, terribly concerned about at the moment. And the first one on the theme of sex and class, and the first one being why are there so few women in the boardrooms, and the second one being what is happening to the sexual morality of our young girls, which both of which are entirely noxious and irrelevant questions to ask, but they seem to be the questions that people are concerned about at the moment. And the first, on the women in boardrooms question, Judith already talked about this new 30% club, and I do actually read Grazia magazine because it's important to know your enemy. And this is the headline article from this week's Grazia. Where have all the bright women gone? And this is clearly a bright woman. And the first question is it starts like this. I've got a question. It's written by Polly Vernon of The Guardian. Where are all the senior level smart ladies? Where are the women CEOs and high profile business player chicks? Anyone seen them? Funny that. It's funnier yet if you consider that this week new research suggested that the 2008 financial crash was the result of the actions of a load of swaggering, testosterone-addled, overconfident men, and showed evidence that a more female-orientated investment culture might have meant that we have avoided the crash altogether. It even identified a new science dedicated to how gender behaviour impacts on and is influenced by economic decisions. It's called neuroeconomics. The next line, feel free to drop it into conversation. And then it goes on to talk about women make up only 12.5% of FTSE 100 company directors, whatever. And so it talks about, it's got an interview with Helena Morrissey, who is the head of the 30% Club, which is this new club aiming to get 30% of women into business, which is so depressing. I don't want to know what is the most depressing half of that sentence. The 30% of women, because it's not proportional. 30% is just the minimum we'll settle for, or into business. Because clearly that's the only sphere in which we're worried about women's representation, and it's got this article basically about how amazing Helena Morrissey is. Morrissey is a 44-year-old mother of 9 children. Yes, 9. A woman who oversees investments worth £47 billion as chief executive of money management firm Newton. Yeah, great for her. Back in the real world, this is the idea of, and this is the idea of liberation that women have been sold over the past, particularly since the 80s, since the beginnings of the backlash against second-wave feminism. This was the idea of liberation we were sold, and I think it's really, really important to analyse this, and really important to say, what does this mean? This idea of the free, liberated woman working in business, it's not normally always in business, spending a great deal of money on her appearance. She has children. The children are looked after by someone else, normally a woman of lower social status. It's definitely not her husband, who's probably also working in business, and she's always straight, by the way, and generally white. She's incredibly wealthy. Her life is caught up in this idea of superwoman. Her energies and time are caught up by juggling, the demands of motherhood, because she has to be a mother. If all these businesswomen who are phrased as they're just single, that seems a tragedy really, because she's not fulfilling her feminine role as well. And that idea of the feminine role, as both Nina and Judith said, is very, very important as a way of limiting women's energy, saying not so fast. Whatever you want to achieve, you will have failed if you don't do this too. If you don't have your 9 children, yes, 9, or whatever it is, and farm them out to women who've come across from overseas. But it's this idea of, and it's this Sex and the City idea of female liberation. This idea that that's the highest you can get, and this obsession with the glass ceiling, which I think is again quite pernicious, really, because there's this idea of the glass ceiling. The idea all we have to do is break the glass ceiling and push a few women up through this mythical barrier into the world of men. And let me read the end of this article. There is a jollier spin on the situation, but it does still leave us wondering how happy we are to have men control the globe's finances, and from that, the rest. Which again really tells you about capitalism incorporating its own critique, because the nature of feminist liberation and feminist theory, and the end point of women's liberation is by its very nature a threat to class society and a threat to capitalist society. Is the biggest threat you can possibly have, because the structure of class society and the structure of capitalist society, as Judith explained very, very well, is dependent on women's unpaid labour, dependent on women's child caring, caring work, cleaning work, and the work in the caring and and teaching professions, and the idea of these kind of professions that women are quite happy to do for low wages or for free. That is work that needs to be done, as Nina said. It needs to be valued. There was, back in the 80s, a campaign for wage and housework. Now that seems entirely silly. But taken to its logical extent, feminism is the greatest threat to class society that we possibly have. And this is one of the reasons capitalism and capitalist society is so keen to incorporate it, because, as Judith said, it's not going back in its box. There is a certain, once you push people, once you show people the possibility of freedom to that extent, that as it has been over the past 100 years, they're not going to accept going back to the kitchen. So you have to trick them into accepting a fake notion of freedom, which is what I think this is. Basically, this is making people go for this kind of wet bourgeois ideal of feminine liberation that only a few people can get to. And on the other side, I want to talk about the attacks on women's sexual agency that are taking place at the moment. And this is definitely something that's changed in the past couple of years. I mean, it's something that's come up. It's something that perennially comes up. I mean, culture is always worried about that little girls are having too much sex. It's been, it's been happening since, for hundreds and hundreds of years. You read kind of monks writing about, oh God, all the young maidens are, they're all out shagging and it's awful. Basically, that's the idea that, for some reason, teenage girls are meant to be the moral guardians of society, which in itself is an interesting concept. But at the moment, this year, you have a few specific things happening. And what's even more worrying is they're being phrased in terms of feminism. One being that we're talking of, there's so much discussion about sexualisation, which I think is this awful, awful, horrendous word which you really have to destroy. It means sexualisation of what some people say children, but we all really know it's young girls because there's no discussion of men at all. The assumption is that the little boys are free to fiddle with themselves as they like, whereas little girls, for little girls, sexuality is a dangerous thing, a dirty thing, and they grow up and you have to stop them being sexualised for as long as possible, because sexualisation is this horrible, damaging thing, and once they've been sexualised, there's no going back. They're tainted. Which is really how it's being phrased. There is this. I don't think there's a feminist or indeed a woman in the world who's not horrified by the culture of sexual objectification. But the way it's phrased at the moment is this is young girls' fault for growing up. We have to, instead of attacking the whole culture at its root, burning it all down and starting it again, we're just going to stop these little girls from growing up as long as possible, because that's the only thing you can do. And there's all these attacks, women shouldn't be taught about sexual agency, women shouldn't be taught, Nathan Dorry's coming forward and saying, women should be taught to say no, as if this is still the only power that women have, power to control their sexual continence. And you have to link that in with the attacks on abortion rights that are taking place at the moment. The idea, right, this week they're trying to force through, this is not a theoretical thing, this week they are trying to force through an amendment in Parliament without a debate that will oblige women to undergo a mandatory counselling period from a objective provider, and the providers they've listed are all Christian fundamentalist associations. And this will delay the timing on the access to legal determination and severely restrict women's access to legal determination, both in terms of time and in terms of the phrasing of their inherent right to control their own bodies. Because obviously if you force someone to have counselling if they didn't know their own mind, it's suggesting that women aren't mature enough to make those decisions about their own bodies. And it's all part of the same horrible attack on women's sexual agency, and we have to understand this as part of the same thing. An attack on women's sexual agency at a time when women's jobs are under threat, when when single mothers are under attack. An attack on women's sexual agency is an attack on women's power. That's all it is. We're frightened of women. It's phrased that we are frightened of women being whole and capable human beings, and being allowed to be whole and capable human beings in society. And that's what this is about. And I think single mothers are but I think single mothers are probably the flashpoint for this. Because the idea that a woman can raise a child by herself without a man and deserves to be paid for it and deserves to be given benefits so she can live and raise that child you know, with some kind of measure of dignity and decency, that is the greatest threat to the current formulations of class and work that we have, which is one of the reasons why single mothers are lobbied against so hard. You saw on Father's Day last week, you know, David Cameron coming out, you know, attacking, you know, fathers who don't stay with their children, as if, you know, because obviously, you know, the way they want society run is they want women to be dependent on men. They don't want anyone to be dependent on the state. They want men to be individual, independent, entrepreneurial actors, and women to be dependent on men. That is why the legal aid changes have come in as they have. That's why the benefit changes have come in as they have. And you know, hundreds of thousands of women this year are realising that they have a choice between marriage and destitution, and that's what we have at the moment. And that's so. Yeah, I've got to wind up. But I just wanted to, yeah, that was what I wanted to say. I think it's very, the attacks coming down the road on sexual agency and women's power in general, women's economic power and women's social power are massively real. We all need to attack them, but we need to be aware of what we're doing, aware of the terms in which we're doing them. I was going to talk a bit about slut walks as well, but I mean, I don't know if I might talk about that in some way.
One point, which was actually the cupcake one, because well, just first of all, I was once banned from a feminist magazine for writing an attack on cupcakes. I think what the woman who mentioned this was pointing to, I think is really, really important about the way in which capitalist culture and consumer culture will adapt. And precisely, I mean, you know, we had this in the 90s as well. We were supposed to be in this post-feminist kind of ironic age in which, you know, sexism was no longer real because, you know, we all knew better. And which is a very depressing time to grow up, and I feel much less depressed than I did in the 1990s, I suppose. But I think we have to be constantly aware of this kind of retro-ironic thing. I mean, the whole point about the 50s revival of this kind of domestic housewife image is, you know, what's obscured in that is obviously the historical narrative in which, you know, an entire sort of ideological machine had to be put into force to try and get women back into the home after they'd had a taste of work during the war, when the men were away. And it's, you know, this kind of lightweight sort of consumer capitalist sort of reclamation of that has got to be countered by a kind of, you know, a deeper historical retelling of, well, telling of the story that goes against that kind of consumer machine. And I think, you know, one of the things, I mean, I talked a bit about the right-wing media, but, you know, consumer culture was the focus of my book. I mean, I think it's a little bit out of date now in the sense that no one's got any money to buy anything anyway, but I think, you know, we will have to always remember that capitalism will sell forms of oppression back to you as forms of emancipation, and that we've always got to see through these attempts, which is why, yeah, we should ban cupcakes.
I'll now call Laurie back.
I want to come back on a couple of points. Firstly, to the comrade who came out in defence of all the testosterone-fueled, crazed men who are ruining the financial system. Which I think is, maybe I didn't make it clear enough when I talked about the Grazzi article, because I assumed that it would be obvious. But the idea that it's somehow kind of masculine disease, that finance is and you know, it's some kind of masculine disease, is really, really nasty and really, really needs to be talked about, because it's this idea, and you've seen it again in the last 6 months when we've had terms like, oh, this is the man's session coming up. You know, men are losing their jobs more, and then suddenly it was women losing more of their jobs, and saying, oh, you know, this recession is, you know, it's about men attacking women, or it's about women attacking men. Who's worse off? You know, we just don't know. You know, the only people who are better off in this recession are the rich. It's not about gender at all. Of course, you can also critique it because of the cod science involved. Claudine Fine's brilliant book, Delusions of Gender, which everyone should read, and completely dismantles the idea that there are these inherent feminine qualities of, caring and responsibility, and being a bit safe with the family finances. The idea that you can spot that in someone's brain, and all women have it. She critiques that and says that actually there aren't those differences, and saying there are is disingenuous. But the idea that somehow, if you had a few more women into the system to mitigate it, and that it was men's fault, takes away the truth, which is that it's the financial system itself that is the problem, rather than men that are the problem. They're making us attack, men and women attack each other, rather than turn around and be angry with the rich. So there's that, and then raunch culture and the use of the word slut. And I think it's very, very important. The comment from Australia said that we have to critique raunch culture, and we do, but we have to understand that raunch culture itself is not sexual liberation at all. It's sexual liberation taken over for profit by capital. It's sexuality, being confiscated from young girls and confiscated from all women and then sold back to us at a profit. It's the idea that you're expected to constantly perform this kind of pastiche of sexuality. You're constantly meant to kind of look hot and look like you're sexually available, but if you actually express any sexual desires of your own, then you're shamed and told you're a slut and a whore and not worth anything and you deserve to be raped. And it's the same dialectic at play when you talk about when you see Nadine Dorries coming out and saying, oh no, women should be taught to say no, and then that cop in Canada coming out and saying that no is actually insufficient if you're wearing a short skirt. And that's what we're facing here at the moment, is a whole-scale attack on women's sexuality, and it's obviously because the model of sexual liberation, the model of sexuality that we are being given at the moment is so disgusting and so painful and so frigid. In many, many ways I find it frigid. It's asexual, it's not about pleasure at all. The word that's missing is pleasure. Because that's so horrible, it's very easy to confuse that, especially by some of the more stupid columnists we have in the bullshit and tabloid press, to confuse that with saying that actually sexual liberation is the problem and sex is the problem. It's not sex that's the problem, sexism is the problem. Slut clearly, this isn't a debate that's where I think, do we call ourselves sluts? Is going to run. And I thought long and hard myself about this before I came out and said, yes, we should. And what sold me on that idea, obviously slut is a term of abuse, but we have to think about why it's a term of abuse. If you go back and you look at the original meaning of the word and the etymology of the word, you can often understand a little bit more of the truth about what words are trying to say to you and how they mean. Because slut, originally, and up until the 1950s, 1960s, wasn't just a term for a woman who is sexually loose and sexually out of control. It's a term for a woman who is out of control in any way, particularly a working class woman who was not in control of her domestic affairs. That was a term of class abuse as well as a term of sexual abuse. And I think this is the root of the issue here. Slut, until in the 1300s, 1400s, was a word for a slack chambermaid, rather than a woman who was sexually incontinent in some way. So it's about coming out and saying we are sluts. For me, that's about saying actually we're not good domestic housewives, and we're not willing to be in control of our sexual drives in the way that patriarchy wants us to be. We're not willing to keep our legs shut. We're not willing to keep our house in order. We're not willing to sit and do the work that people tell us we now need to do because there's a recession on, and we're not willing to do all of that. And for me, that's what saying you're a slut and you're proud is about. People who disagree with me on this, I understand, that's fine. But that's why I'm happy to come out and say that. But for me, the best thing about the slut walks, to bring it right back to what Judith talked about at the start, was how in France, first in France, and then in London and across the world, people came out with placards that said, "We are all chambermaids," referencing the defendant, not sorry, the accused. She may as well be defended. In the case of Dominic Strauss-Kahn, and who's been charged with rape, saying, you know, we are all that chambermaid. We are all, you know, the woman being accused of being a slut, the woman whose norms being questioned because she's working class. And I thought that phrase, "we are all chambermaids," was the best thing about the slut walks, and the best thing I want a poster on my wall. We are all chambermaids, and that's for me. That's my defence of the slut walks.
Right, I think it's interesting that when you look at the unions that were on strike on the 30th, 3 out of the 4 were led by women. Now this is unusual, this is a change, and people have talked about the various areas that they've been involved with when they go to meetings that they're all men. And in a way it's a sign of the times, isn't it? It's a sign of people fighting for the fact that if the union is dominated by women members, and actually women are more densely organised in unions than men at the moment, they should be represented by women. And it comes into this argument also about the 30% club and the idea of having more women at the top of society, and is this an answer? I want more women at the top of society. I want every job to have 50% women, including, you know, the FTSE 100 and all of these other things. That would reflect a society that was less discriminatory against women just because they're women. But would it be enough? Is it going to make society nicer, better, cuddlier, better? Well, I don't think so. Do you think the women at the top of these unions are going to be less under pressure from elements to say, oh, maybe we should just do this deal, maybe we should just, maybe we shouldn't go for another strike, maybe we shouldn't, you know, they're going to be under precisely the same pressures as male trade union leaders, and therefore, not intrinsically, because she's a woman, is going to be, you know, necessarily a brilliant radical that's going to lead us to ever victory. And the same when it comes to things like the IMF. They have replaced Strauss-Kahn with a woman. Now, do we really think because she's a woman, she's going to have a different attitude towards the strikes in Greece and whether they should take austerity? No, we don't. And I suppose this comes to me to where I don't actually call myself a feminist. You know, I actually call myself a socialist because I don't think it's enough just to look at society through a prism of gender. I think we have to look at it in a bigger way. And so for me, the idea of women's liberation is utterly sort of knitted into, if you like, class society, and therefore we'll not be able to sort of challenge it fundamentally. We want to find, like I say, I do want to see more women in different positions because that's an improvement, but for me it's not the answer, because actually you will still be leaving the deepest inequality there, which is class society, because actually it's absolutely true, most women are not entrepreneurs or MPs, most men are not entrepreneurs or MPs either, and therefore we're fighting for something more, and therefore that's why it's sort of, it's different to patriarchy, and also I think that analysis is linked to where the solution lies, isn't it? And both the way that we can fight for those improvements within capitalism and fight for something even better than capitalism is about a collective strength. And I think, you know, we have the possibility of fighting for a society where the idea that somebody would be paid more because she's got breasts as opposed to somebody who's got a penis would look as ridiculous as, well, I think it is ridiculous actually, but, you know, for people it becomes so entrenched that people think that's natural. You know, that if you've got freckles or something, you know, the generations down the line in a social society people say, what, Granny? Was it really true? You know, that there was a page 3 in a newspaper that just had women with their tops off and people paid for this, or is it really true that women didn't get paid as much, or they weren't seen that they could be astronauts, or, you know, all that, you know, it's sort of, that, it is ridiculous when you think about it, but we're so shaped by the world that we grew up in that this seems like impossible. And I don't think it is impossible. And I think that we're living in a different era now. What the Arab Spring, the Arab revolutions have done have put us into an era of revolutions, where actually people start to think outside the limits of current day society, and therefore the fight against oppression is going to be completely linked with that fight against the ruling class, against imperialism and all the rest of it, all the big sort of features of capitalism. And I think that when we talk about the fight against oppression, we don't want to separate it out. Now, I'm not arguing either of you are saying this, but I think it's so important in the wider discussions we have, because I don't think it can be separated out. I think I worry sometimes that some of the response to raunch culture, if you like, can itself be in some way shaped by raunch culture, can itself almost be imbued with some of that. We almost have to in a rejection of raunch culture, we have to be defined by our sexual our sexuality. I don't think we should be defined by our sexuality, whether it's a positive or a negative thing. You know, it's not that that's the only part of being a woman. Actually, being a woman is everything. And therefore, you know, I sort of, as you know, I sort of disagree with Laurie in terms of using the word slut. And I think it's more about, you know, we can look at the roots of the words, and I'm really interested in that, where language comes from, but it reflects the reality of the power and divisions in society, isn't it? Language only reflects it. And I don't think by actually saying we're going to embrace it, actually challenges the notion that comes from why we're called it, which is, you're right, working class women, their sexuality, their ability to go off and do things is what the ruling class are terrified of. They don't like the idea that working class women go out and get drunk and go and have sex at the weekend. This horrifies them. And therefore, I think that this is something that just the language on its own is not enough. But I'll just end on the one thing that I think history shows, that when women and men, go into struggles, however small and large, everything then is up for grabs, isn't it? I'm a materialist. I think the ideas about women flow from the material reality of a society, which makes it appear like this is what we're capable of. And this is the same for men. The young guy who spoke, I think, is absolutely right. You know, men are crushed by the gender expectations of them, aren't they? They shouldn't cry, they shouldn't show emotion, maybe they're not good with kids, and maybe they always have to compete, and if somebody does something to you, you've got to hit them. That's the only response that real men would do. You know, but these are things that actually oppress men, aren't they? It's absolutely true that women are at the bottom of the pile, but we have to understand that this actually crushes all of the humanity out of all of us, all the possibility for us to individually express ourselves, whether sexually or in any other way. And therefore, for me, when we talk about an era of revolutions, when we talk about that sort of struggle, it means everything's up for grabs. It isn't just about economic equality. It's about genuine liberation. Liberation of every part of our lives. For me, a social society is about every individual being able to express themselves in a way. So we're not prudes, we're not censorious, we're not prescriptive about people's lives. We are the opposite of that. We're the opposite of the Tories who complain about these things. We are for more openness, more liberation, and actually for us to have self-emancipation for everybody. That's what socialism is for me.